What's the best way to build a savings habit if you live paycheck to paycheck? Welcome back to Invested in You, brought to you by Community First Investment Group. I'm your host, Nate Hastow, and we're here to help you take the next step in your financial journey, no matter where you're starting from. In our pilot episode, we introduced our team and the vision behind the podcast, and last episode, we covered Intro to Investing, so if you're just joining us now, feel free to go back and give those a listen. They lay out a great foundation for today's topic. Today we're talking about a big question that we hear all the time. What's the difference between saving and investing? And more importantly, when should you do one or the other? We'll break down the roles each play in your financial life, because understanding how to balance savings and investing is a key to a strong foundation. So, setting the stage here, the first piece that we really need to understand is what actually is saving. Simply put, this is setting money aside. This should be low risk. Typically, it is short-term focused. You may hear a phrase, emergency fund, as a way that people refer to this. Near-term goals is definitely something that qualifies for this. If we're putting a defined time horizon on this money probably should not be for items that you plan on utilizing more than 3 years in the future. And to peel the layer back just a little bit further, the emergency fund portion of this does not necessarily have a defined time horizon beyond the fact that it may be needed at a moment's notice. So 1 to 3 years, if you're investing for shorter than that range of time, is a bit more like gambling than actually investing. So we want our short-term money in short-term style accounts. As a refresher, if you missed our last episode, investing is spending money with the expectation of a profit or return. This does have a market fluctuation aspect of things, meaning you're not fully in control of what that account or what those dollars are worth at any given time in the short term. But understanding when to deploy either of those strategies is an extremely important piece of the equation. Both are going to be key to building a strong foundation long term, but I'm of the mind that you need to make sure that today and tomorrow are taken care of before you're worrying too much about 30 years from now. It's not to say that that's not important, but if you can't make it until 30 years, it's not going to matter anyways. So let's make sure that our short term is covered initially. Discussing a little bit more about when to save, when to invest. When it comes to determining which piece of the plan you're trying to focus on, as I mentioned previously, time horizon is probably the number one key. So considering, is this big purchase that I'm going to make something that's more than 3 years in the future? If so, there may be a scenario where investing makes sense. Again, consult your financial advisor to determine what level of risk makes sense. If it's a 4-year investment, for instance. If it is your emergency fund that you're saving up for, if it's a down payment on a house that you're planning on trying to purchase in 2 years, really a savings account is a more effective place to keep that money. We discussed in our last episode that mathematically speaking, you can't actually save your way into retirement, which is a little confusing when you hear people say save for the future, people talking about what is your savings rate. And it is a confusing aspect of the language that we use, so revolving around saving or investing. What I usually tell people is the saving aspect that goes into investing is set aside with that terminology because it is something that you actively control and take part of. The investment gains that you may see are separate from you in most capacities. No one, ourselves included, here at Community First Investment Group have the strings that are attached to the market. We don't control whether it goes up, down, or sideways. And no one that I've met yet has those strings or a special button that makes that happen. So really the things that we can focus on and can control, whether it's for short-term or long-term, is how much money we're setting aside. When it comes down to figuring out how to put all this together, it's helpful to have a financial plan in place. This is something that we do on a daily basis for our clients. There are many meetings that we sit in where I have honestly the pleasure of telling people that either things look great long term, we need to save for the short term, or sometimes not as fun of a thing to describe to clients, but sometimes they're not ready to either start contributing again or start contributing at all to their long-term financial plan. And that, while it's not usually what I want to tell people, is certainly an important aspect of taking their needs into account and operating as a fiduciary. So it's a super important aspect of what we do. If we dive a little deeper into how these two actions play together nicely, the role of saving is really designed around financial security and short-term financial security. If we look at the statistics, 1 out of every 5 Americans have no savings, $0 in their savings account. Needless to say, that's it's not just living on the edge; it's living below the line. It's a terrible place, and I never want to see anyone there. Thankfully, we have helped some folks that were in that situation and just needed to take a step back and see what's going on and figure out what their options were. Sometimes some spending habits needed to be revamped. Sometimes just generally more lucrative income needed to be sought. And it is a major challenge that I don't want to downplay, but it is something that can be overcome. 2 out of 5 Americans can't handle a $400 cash emergency. So one of the things that we do in the advisory role is we're acting a little bit as a screen to help protect people from themselves. There are numerous times a year that we speak with someone who maybe hasn't done a lot of investing long term, or even sometimes who has done a lot of investing long term, but life has thrown them a bit of a raw deal, and they either want to get started initially or they want to get back into it. And one of the first questions we always ask is to tell us a little bit more about how much money they actually have set aside in their emergency fund or in their savings account. And the reality is, if this is not partially funded and actively being contributed to, it's probably not a responsible decision for us to tell them to invest long term when they don't have today and tomorrow taken care of. So if you're looking for some general rules of thumb of how much should I set aside in that emergency fund, the rules of thumb are helpful, but you probably want to get this personalized at some point. $1,000 is a great first goal to set aside. I certainly won't promise you that $1,000 can cover every single emergency that crops up, but as we've seen with the stats, it's head and shoulders above where many Americans find themselves today. And it's an attainable number, I believe, as well. So it can create a nice emotional win to go along with it. If you found yourself in the camp where I do have $1,000 set aside, it's a great start, but please do not stop there when it comes to setting up an emergency fund. $2,500, I think, is a nice jump to that next level. Again, $2,500 does not usually cover everything that could come up. So once you hit 25, I'd say your next goal should be about $5,000. Personally and professionally, I prefer that people keep somewhere around $10,000 as a minimum, which sounds like a lot. We're getting into 5 digits, and there are a lot of people who don't have any money saved. So the reality of the situation is it's not something that's going to happen overnight. For many people, it's not something that they can save even if they start at the beginning of the year and work diligently all year long. So it may be a multi-year goal that you're working on accomplishing. But create those small goals for yourselves along the way, and we help folks do that as well and kind of operate as accountability partners in that. But ultimately, what you should be running calculations for is you want to figure out what 3 to 6 months of your fixed expenses would look like for the average American. If you find yourself in a position where you're a business owner or you have variable income, you may want to save more in excess of 3 to 6 months of fixed expenses. Reason being on this, it's very possible with variable income that there may be months at a time that you don't make much or don't make anything, depending on what your profession is. So this is a very personalized number that should be figured out, and it's essentially a starting point for us when we begin working with a client. If we look at how investing can build and how long-term growth functions, we touched in our earlier episodes about compound interest. This is an aspect. Oftentimes it's achieved through appreciation of share prices, as well as dividends that are paid by shares that allow us to purchase more shares along with appreciation in prices. Appreciation in a stock price is based on many factors, but in essence, it is the perceived and real value of a company increasing over time. Now, this may be driven by the company's increased profits. It may be driven in part by perception of this company and potential future profits. Oftentimes, we don't recommend that people invest, especially small amounts, in one individual company because of the concentration that this risk that this can provide. So again, speak with your advisor specifically about how you should implement this on your own. But those are two different ways that compound interest effect can really be impactful with your long-term investing plan. And the reality is, for every single person, figuring out how much of the money you are able to save should go to short-term versus long-term is a priority question that is different for every single person. But from a rule of thumb perspective, focus on achieving some of those rules of thumb goals for emergency fund savings along the way. And if you're looking for more guidance over and above that, by all means consult a financial advisor for assistance. When focusing on that emergency fund, if you get beyond that rule of thumb and 3 to 6 month objective, you can also, if you're super nerdy like myself and want to kind of get into the weeds, you can consider something called employment risk. This is identifying how challenging it would be for you to find a new job if you were let go or the company closed. So consider this. If you're a sales rep in a non-specialized industry, it's very likely your skills are transferable and will be able to move from one company to another with relative ease. If you find that you are a niche specialist in a specific industry, especially if it's a smaller industry, the reality may be you might actually have to move states or move across the country to find a similar role and a similar paying role to the one that you have now. So consider how many people hold a similar role or being paid similarly to yourself. I understand not all of that information is public record, so you have to do a little bit of extrapolating. And if you want guidance with understanding that, by all means consult your advisor. It's one of the things that we look at from a risk management perspective and determine, do I need to have more income or more funds rather set aside in case of emergency. When we talk about how to actually implement the investing aspect of this, more often than not, people have access to some sort of a retirement plan with their company. Oftentimes, this is a 401k. There are several other options that may be available, but this is a pretty common one that people have heard of. Our recommendation typically is to consider what's available from your company as a match of sorts. It's the only real place you're going to find bonus or free money, as sometimes people call it. I'm a huge fan of working through the process of optimizing the match that's available through your employer. Once in a while, I'll hear clients refer to this as maximizing or maxing out their 401k. That is a very different thing from optimizing your match. Optimizing truly means putting in the right number of your dollars in order to get the maximum number of the dollars that are available in a match or in a bonus of sorts from your employer for retirement contributions. As always, understand your risk tolerance, and if you're willing to see large ups and downs in your account when you're investing, even through a 401k, this is something that may be available through your 401k provider, but if it is not, or if you'd like a more personalized approach, you can always consult your financial advisor to consider how it blends into your personal situation. We do have a Q&A question for today. Question for today is, what's the best way to build a savings habit if you live paycheck to paycheck? And this, I think, is a reality for a lot of people, unfortunately. The first thing that I usually recommend if people are realizing that their dollars are really tight on a month-to-month basis is go through and do a real-time budget. If you spend dollars in cash on a constant basis, this can be a challenge. You might have to go receipt hunting. But most people nowadays will use a debit or a credit card to do their purchasing. So with that in mind, it's a pretty easy process going back and looking at, I usually recommend the last 2 to 3 months of credit card or debit card statements. Go through and do a bit of an audit. Figure out where the money went is probably the first step. Oftentimes, there are some dollars that are being spent in places that don't truly align with where your goals are headed or where you want to be headed. These are things that can allow you to modify that behavior moving forward. Sometimes the truth is that you're just not making enough to make ends meet, which is a tough reality, but I do believe that functioning in reality is a more practical way to address it versus operating from a wishing and wanting mindset. So determining what exactly the problem is first. So are you not making enough, or is it just not being spent in the most effective way for you, is probably step one. Step two, once you've identified that, assuming that there are dollars going to Amazon or DoorDash or any of the other numerous places we can find to let the money head that isn't staying in our pockets or in our investment accounts. That's a good place to determine if there's actual dollars available to set aside for the future, whether that be short-term or long-term. If it is an income issue, then there may be other steps that need to be explored, whether it's current employment opportunities, if there's promotion opportunities internally where you are working, if there are degrees that you're not utilizing, if there are degrees that are almost finished but not completely finished. That can be a little bit of a strategic play. All of those are good scenarios to run through with your financial advisor before officially taking a dive in, though. There is an element of risk in every single one of those considerations. But oftentimes it's just helpful to talk through the budget with someone who is not emotionally invested in where those dollars are being sent, just to give a little bit of a reality check in a kind way. So hopefully that helps. Closing up today, I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Invested in You, brought to you by Community First Investment Group. Here for your now, here for your future. We hope that you found today's episode helpful. If you have any questions or want to talk with our team, please visit us at cfigadvisors.com or check us out on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We'll see you for our next episode on Retirement Planning 101. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Securities and advisory services are offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and broker-dealer, member FINRA SIPC. Insurance products are offered through LPL or its licensed affiliates. Community First Bank and Community First Investment Group are not registered as a broker-dealer or investment advisor. Registered representatives of LPL offer products and services using Community First Investment Group and may also be employees of Community First Bank. These products and services are being offered through LPL or its affiliates, which are separate entities from and not affiliates of Community First Bank or Community First Investment Group.
Securities and insurance offered through LPL or its affiliates are not FDIC insured by FDIC or any other government agency, not bank guaranteed, not bank deposits or obligations, and may lose value.